Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Geeking Out podcast. I am the Athletic Geek, and my guest this week is somebody that you heard me say I really wanted to get on this show back in the Anakin Murphy episode. Rob Leach. Rob Leach is somebody I gotta be perfectly honest, was not aware of in the wrestling business until my friends over at Fight Underground started their promotion, and I saw his interview, and I'm just like, "Whoa, this guy's fucking great!" And just the way he was able to the No Futures promo really grabbed me, and was really like what he did at Fight Underground. So I'm happy to have you, Rob. Thanks for being on the show.
Well, hey, thanks for having me. I'm very glad to be here on the Geeking Out podcast.
All right. My first question for all my wrestling related guests are: were you a wrestling fan growing up, and what drew you to professional wrestling?
Okay, so my mom has told me this multiple times. The day I was born, uh, she said there was wrestling on in the hospital room.
Nice.
And basically, I've been watching wrestling ever since I was born with my parents, what have you. I think the night I was born, like Sunday Night Heat was on, something like that. And I remember bits and pieces of watching it growing up, but the very first time it really stuck with me was my mom was dating this guy in 2014, and he would watch Raw every single week. And there was an episode of Raw that was promoting the WWE Hall of Fame, and it was promoting the induction of Paul Bearer. And
Okay.
I remember seeing this induction announcement video, and I was like, "Oh my god, that dude is cool. That dude's really cool." And so I remember I watched that over and over on YouTube, and I was like, "This guy is like weird. He's interesting. He's unique, but he's cool.
Right.
He's creepy. He's so creepy that it's cool."
Gotcha.
And so I saw that he had this guy named The Undertaker, who I'd heard of, but didn't really, think much of at the time.
Right.
And I started looking into The Undertaker, and I started thinking, holy crap, this guy's good. And I remember watching on Raw every week, well, okay, The Undertaker has this streak, this undefeated streak at WrestleMania, and he's defending it this weekend at WrestleMania. And I remember I would follow it, and then the night after WrestleMania on Raw, when they announced that the streak was broken, that was my first moment of, oh man, that sucks.
Right.
And so that's really where it started, and I started to watch a little more religiously after that. I remember vividly watching when the Shield broke up the very first time.
Okay.
I remember we were just standing around talking, and all of a sudden I hear my mom go, "Wait, what's he doing?" And I look at the TV, and there's Seth Rollins standing over Dean Ambrose, or standing over Roman with the chair. And I'm like, "Oh my god!" And that was actually 2 nights after we went to a house show here in Springfield.
Okay.
Yeah, and we got to see the very last house show that the Shield was together on. It was the
That's
night
pretty cool.
before. Yeah, it was the night before Payback, I think, the pay per view. And so yeah, that's kind of where I got started with wrestling. That's really where it stuck, was about 2014.
Okay. So you mentioned you were really drawn in by the clips of Paul Bearer and the Undertaker. You also mentioned the Shield. You have any other favorites that really kind of kept your attention through that first couple of years of watching wrestling before you decided to get involved in the wrestling business yourself?
Okay, so that very first year, I remember I really liked watching The Undertaker, but of course started getting really into The Undertaker right as he like disappeared after WrestleMania 30.
Right.
And so I was watching it every single week. I was watching Raw and SmackDown. And I mean, the names that I can remember from that time, like I remember the very early days of Seth Rollins' heel turn. I remember, oh geez, I remember the whole John Cena Brock Lesnar thing very vividly.
Right.
Uh, I remember watching Seth Rollins win Money in the Bank. So really, Seth Rollins, John Cena, Bray Wyatt is another one. Roman Reigns. Those names really come to mind as my favorites at that time.
Right.
Um, if we're talking today, I would have to say I really like Drew McIntyre. Um, I love the work that The Miz does all the time because no matter what he's given, no matter how stupid the writing is in my mind, The Miz pulls it off 100% like a true professional. And so I'll always respect The Miz and love The Miz for that. Um, honestly, it's really hard to say. I just
Right.
kind of watch it to watch it
Right.
anymore.
um. So you kind of mentioned some of your favorites. Where after you kind of fall into this rabbit hole of wrestling, because around the time you're saying you're getting into wrestling, that's when WWE launches the WWE Network, and
Yes.
through that, were you just like, did you get the network? Did you just start taking in all the wrestling you could, or were you just kind of a Raw, SmackDown, this before AEW or anything? Maybe some Impact. Uh, were you just watching what was on TV, or were you like, I gotta have more of this? And were you on the network? Were you on YouTube? How did your wrestling fandom progress? I guess I should say.
Okay, so 2014 was a really difficult kind of time in convincing because I was still younger. I was 13 at this time. And so
Okay.
it was kind of a difficult time to kind of try and convince family members to like buy stuff like having to do with wrestling.
Right.
So if I wanted to watch Money in the Bank, I'd have to go online and find one of those streaming sites, and I watched it that way.
Gotcha.
And that's how I watched Money in the Bank and SummerSlam because I remember hearing about these pay-per-views coming up. I remember the whole build up to Money in the Bank. I was like, I want to watch that so bad, and I couldn't convince anyone to get the network for me for Money in the Bank or for SummerSlam, and so I ended up just uh, watching it on those streaming sites.
Okay.
And I think finally, around the time Survivor Series came that year, I was able to get the WWE Network, and I've had it ever since.
Oh, I know. I always joke with some of the new fans, like it's so much easier for them to fall down the rabbit hole because WWE has it all laid out for them. Whereas whenever I was first getting into wrestling, like I just had to hope that the video store
Oh yeah,
had a new tape, and then like even I had YouTube. I've had people on here that had to tape trade to find out about wrestling, and I'm like, I just had YouTube and type that in, and
oh yeah,
but
definitely. I mean, I had those streaming sites, and I had YouTube to try and find whatever wrestling I could because this was before the time that WWE would release their full matches from history.
right.
And so I just have to watch the top 10 videos from back a year earlier and see what happened then.
Right. Um, I think something very interesting. You mentioned how you were really, really drawn into Paul Bear, and honestly, up until very recently with AEW, making use of legendary wrestlers like Tully Blanchard, Jake the Snake, Taz, Arn Anderson in managerial roles. In the recent era, there hasn't been a lot of a strong managerial presence outside of the independent scene. So you making a name for yourself as a manager, I think it is pretty cool that you were drawn in essentially by a manager. Are there
Yeah,
any
and
other? Oh, go ahead, please.
I think that's really where it starts to come full circle. When I first got into wrestling, I didn't start managing until I was almost 3 years in.
Okay,
So I was never a manager. I started in 2015, and I was never a manager until July of 2018, where I figured, okay, I'm going to be a manager from like this one dude in a battle royal this one time. And then that just ended up spreading to other companies around the area, and we made a big thing of it.
okay,
And so, and I really liked it, and I've always looked to guys like Paul Bearer, Bobby Heenan, Jimmy Hart, Jim Cornette, even, all these great guys who really put put great use to their skill on a microphone and just their knowledge, and then putting it through wrestling and really making it, getting themselves over with the knowledge and the skill that they had. And I've always been trying to, take from them and figure out how I can make myself, I guess, make myself more unique to a manager role.
Gotcha. So you mentioned you became involved in the professional wrestling business in 2015. You weren't out of school yet then, were you?
No, when I got into wrestling, so I guess we can just talk about how I got into wrestling real
Sure.
quick.
Let's do it.
Um, got into the business, I should say. Um, so my mom came up to me like a week before and said, "Hey, you know, we're going to this baseball game this weekend, and there's going to be a wrestling show afterwards. Do you want to go?" I said, "Sure, why not?" And so I went to this company called Pinfall Wrestling Association in Springfield, Illinois.
Okay.
And I remember watching the baseball game and just being like, "When's the wrestling start? Come on, hurry up." And then finally the wrestling show gets underway, and it's just so vividly in my memory now, just sitting there and watching this show and being like, I never knew we had it. I had heard about independent wrestling companies, but I had never been interested in them because I just didn't know anyone and I didn't care to take the time to learn anyone's name. And so now knowing that we had one in my hometown where I lived, I could more easily be like, okay, maybe I can take the time to learn about these people. And so here I am. This is 2015. So I believe I'm going into my sophomore year in high school. And I'm just learning about all this good stuff.
Right.
And so I went online after that baseball game show was over. And I looked up Pinfall Wrestling Association on Facebook to see what I could find. I found their website, I found their Facebook page, and I found a contact us option where you could get a hold of them with any questions or any inquiries or anything. And I was like, man, wouldn't it be cool to actually be involved with this? And then I thought, well, there's got to be some sort of age limit. And so I type out this whole email to a guy named Tim Givens, who at the time was one of the higher administrative people. He's still with the company to this day. And me and Tim are very close now. But I send this email to this guy named Tim Givens. I'm like, hey, my name's Rob Leach. I live here in Springfield. I went to your show at Take Me Out to the Brawl Game, which is the show name, and I really enjoyed it, and I'd really like to do commentary. And I don't know why, but commentary was like the thing I wanted to do
Okay.
because I never thought like I've never had the thought I want to be a wrestler. I want to wrestle. That part has never really appealed to me doing that full time. I've always liked, the outside roles where they don't always get involved, but when they do get involved, it's a really cool or really, it's a spot that can really get someone over even further.
Right.
And so I've always been interested in doing commentary, ring announcing, managing, but earlier just commentary and ring announcing was my biggest things. And so I asked him, like, hey, I'd like to do commentary. And I was 14 years old, and my great introduction into PWA is I lied about my age. I told him I was 15 and that I would be turning, I think I told him I'd be turning 16 very soon. And they were like, okay, come on out. We've got a show in September. You can come out to this high school and we're going to have this show. We have a job for you. Because they're like, so in wrestling, Tim Givens plays a character called Billy Alexander. And Tim is writing out this email And he's like, this is just some dumb kid. So he actually types out, we actually already have a commentary table, and it's going to be debuted at this September show by PWA's own Billy Alexander. And I'm like, man, you're putting your own character over, but that's okay. Um, but anyway, so oh geez, so I go to the venue that day, and Tim comes up to me. We shake hands. We introduce face to face. He's like, okay, I've got a job for you. Just give me a couple minutes and I'll be right back. So I sit there, and an hour and a half, 2 hours later, he finally comes back. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to be doing, but I'm just going to wait. And so he finally comes back after a couple of hours, and he's like, all right, do you think you're any good on a microphone? And here I am. I have only ever commentated one match by myself on my computer.
Now, what
And
was?
I'm
You
like,
gotta tell me what
yeah,
the
I'm good
match
on
is
a
now.
microphone.
You gotta tell me what that match is now.
That match was, oh dear. Um, I think it was a dark match between AJ Styles and Rico Constantino
Okay,
from like
I,
Sunday
I
Night Heat
I
back
know.
in 2001.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about now. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
So I had commentated that, and I just had it for myself. I didn't even send it to this company when I brought it in, because I remember I sent the email and I was like, do I even know if I can do this? And so I tried it, and I was like, I hope that's good enough. And so he comes up to me at the show. Do you know if you're any good on a microphone? And I was just hoping to God that I was correct about myself. I said, yeah. And so he said, all right, you're going to do commentary tonight. And so I did commentary. And at the time, I'm 14 years old. I've never had huge social interaction in terms of working on a wrestling show.
Right,
And so I've just never been that kind of guy who has actually had his voice projected for many people to hear. And
right.
it's not like we were doing live commentary over the speakers, but I knew this was going to be heard by multiple people. And so I sit down next to this guy. His character name was Priest. His name's Ben Grafton. He's a very good friend of mine. I love him dearly. And I sit down next to him, and I meet this brand new guy for the first time ever. And I'm like, I'm going to know you for like half an hour, and then we're going to do commentary. I'm scared to death. And so we do commentary, and he told me, he said, well, you're good. I can tell you're very shy, but you're actually pretty good. And he was the first person that really had any faith in me when it came to doing commentary and being in professional wrestling. And so that's basically how I got my start. I started there, and then continued on from there, and we can get into the rest here in a little bit.
Um, so your first job was a commentator. Um, what do you feel like is the biggest challenge to being a wrestling commentator? I've done wrestling commentary myself for a St. Louis promotion, and I've joked sometimes I think I make Mike Adamle sound like Gordon Soley. That's how bad I think I do. What
um,
do you feel is the biggest challenge? How do you feel? You need to project yourself. As a commentator, uh, for people that might be starting up their independent promotions and might need commentators. What advice do you have?
okay, so one of the more challenging things uh, in pro wrestling, especially today when you're on the indie scene and you're offering yourself out there to be this commentator, like if you need it, I'll be your commentary guy. One of the bigger challenges is doing commentary with so many people you've never met, and you don't know if they're good. You don't know if they're like Bobby the Brain Heenan, or if, like you said, they're Mike Adamle. And you just have to show up and hope that they're good enough to carry it on, or else you're going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting.
Right.
Another challenge is if you show up and there's no one else and it's just you. That's happened to me many times. And it can get difficult coming up with enough to say for a 2.5 hour wrestling show by yourself.
Absolutely.
Um, I think one of the bigger challenges would have to be finding an expansive vocabulary. Because if you go back to my very early days on commentary, which I hope to God no one ever does, um, you'll probably hear me 48 different times on one wrestling show at least saying kick out at two, kick out at two, kick out at two. And I finally realized that that was getting repetitive one time, and I was like, I'm going to listen to some Monday Night Raw commentary, and I'm going to see what they say when a kick out happens and when a cover happens, and I'm going to start studying everything that they say. And so I noticed Michael Cole would say, kick out at two, oh, a 2 count, oh, he barely got his shoulder up. And so from there, I think I kind of started to expand my vocabulary. And I also started just studying wrestling moves. So, like, I would just grab a compilation like this wrestler's 10 greatest moves that he does. And I would watch this highlight video of these 10 greatest moves, and I'd see the name of the move, and I'd watch the move, and I'd be like, okay, so this is not called this, but it's called this.
Right.
And so I think one of the biggest challenges uh, to being a commentator kind of comes full circle with all of that, because now you get into the whole, okay, maybe you're by yourself, but I can handle that. Okay, I've got the vocabulary, I can handle that. But now I have to do commentary for half a roster full of guys I've never seen in my life.
Sure.
And that can be on the commentator as to why he doesn't know them, or that can be on the promotion. If the
Right.
promotion didn't advertise these people, then it's not the commentator's fault necessarily. But if the commentator knew that these matches were being advertised and didn't do his homework, then that can be, it's easily the commentator's fault, his or her. I'm not just saying it's a guy's job. I want
Sure.
to be specific with that. But yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges is just knowing all this stuff, because a lot of people think, okay, to do commentary, all you have to do is sit down at a table and talk. And I've had some guys who can cut really great promos sit down next to me and just not be able to commentate worth anything because they don't they don't have the vocabulary, they don't have the knowledge as to what's going on and who's wrestling and what's happening, and they don't know how to play off the other guy.
Right.
And so I think those are really the biggest challenges in being a commentator. So my biggest pieces of advice to kind of go back to that part of the question would be probably, just do your homework. Try your best to get all the information you can. If the company's not advertising any matches, get a hold of the promoter and be like, hey, man, who are some guys that you have on the card? So at least you know their specific statistics. And then kind of look back on their history, who wrestled each other on this last show, and kind of write that down for each person that's on the show. And then when you find out the match order that night, you can kind of piece things together and be like, oh, this is a rematch from last month, or these guys had a huge feud a couple years ago, and you can really start going. In PWA, for me, it's absolutely nothing anymore. If I have to do commentary, I basically know PWA's entire history because I've had a lot of free time during COVID and over the past 5 years now. So,
Right.
so I pride myself on being like the PWA encyclopedia, basically. But anyway, so yeah, I really think that just doing your homework and trying to find as much information about a show and the wrestlers on that show can really help a commentator just be 10 times better.
Absolutely. So you mentioned you kind of had a baptism by fire when it comes to being a commentator. How long did you really till you really felt like you hit your stride? How long, taking all these things that we just mentioned, did you finally? Uh, do you feel that your commentary game kind of came together?
Well, I had a lot of time on my own to do it on my own and kind of feel out how I felt I was doing. And then I also had a couple of other times where I had, Tim Givens from PWA would sit next to me on commentary occasionally. He'd listen to how I did commentary. He'd do commentary with me, and then he'd kind of give me pointers after that. And so I really think I really like to credit him as one of my mentors when it comes to doing commentary. Same with Priest, as I said earlier, and there's a couple other guys too. But I think probably around April or May of 2016, I really started to get the hang of it for sure. In terms of, okay, I've been here for a few months now. I know all these guys on this show, and I know what they've been doing for the past few months. So now I have stuff to work off of, and I know what moves they do, and I know what their moves are called, and I know all this kind of stuff. So whether I'm commentating alone or I'm commentating with Tim or who have you, at least I know about these guys now, and I'm really starting to get the groove of it at this point. So I think after about, you know, 6 or 7 months, I kind of started finally to get the groove of things.
So you start out as a color commentator. When does your repertoire start to expand to the ring announcing and then finally becoming a manager?
So I did commentary for 2 years. I solely did commentary for 2 years. And so in 2017, we brought on. So late 2016, uh, a couple of the owners at PWA, Antoine Archie and Brian Ely, they both come up to me and they're like, "Hey, our ring announcer has decided he's leaving, and we're about to go in. We were about to start taping shows to put on Fight TV,
Okay.
and they were like, we're going to need a new ring announcer." And okay, so the very first show I ever ring announced was only a year after I had started, because because they told me, hey, um, our ring announcer can't be at this show. And I said, all right, well, do you think maybe I could give it a try? Because I'd like to give it a try. And I'll tell you right now, well, one, before I say it this way, do you allow cussing on this show?
Yeah, you can say whatever you want.
Okay, so I was the drizzling shits. Um, because on commentary, I had taken up a persona of I am the number one broadcast journalist to the president of PWA, and the head owner of PWA, Antoine Archie, was actually playing the gimmick of the president of PWA at that time. So I was being kind of the heel commentator, and if I ever had a partner on commentary with me, I would be able to say, okay, so you can play off of me as the face and kind of try to just bury me whenever I praise President Archie, but I'm going to praise President Archie the whole time. And when I went into my ring announcing, I didn't realize that, one, we're in a completely different town. We're in Beardstown, Illinois, which is 45 minutes away from where we usually do our shows in Springfield. And most of these people don't know who I am. In fact, most of the people in Springfield probably have never heard my commentary at this point. And so I don't realize that. So when I go into the ring to ring announce, I don't want to be too excited and enthusiastic, because I want to still put myself off as a heel.
Right.
I didn't put myself off as a heel. I didn't expand the heel gimmick. I didn't play it off like I'm trying to be this big, badass monster heel. I just was boring. I went out there, and the exact way I started the show, I remember it. I said, welcome to Beardstown Beatdown number 3. And like, no pop. I'm not giving any room for the crowd to give a reaction. And so, I mean, it was just absolutely terrible. And they did not want me touching a microphone for the longest time after that.
Ooh.
But a few months after that, so every single month after that, I would kind of think to myself, I was bad then. I was bad at that show. Wonder what I could do better. Because I remember when they came up to me, I think it was kind of a last resort sort of thing. They were like, okay, we're gonna need a comment, or we're gonna need a ring announcer for this Fight TV stuff, and like, you're the only guy we really have. And at the time, they're telling me, we're going to need you to do ring announcing and commentary and backstage interviews. And here I am, like, getting freaked out. I'm like, all I have is a t-shirt and black slacks. Like, that's all I ever wear to these shows. And so they're like, okay, but yeah, we're going to need you to do all this stuff. And this is before the Christmas show in 2016. And at the Christmas show, there was a lady that came with her husband, and the lady's name was Carrie. And I think she or her husband knew Brian Ely, and they all started talking. And she said, well, I'd like to maybe be an announcer or something in the company. And so, just like that, and I'm not saying, you know, screw them for doing this, but I'm saying, I kind of got pushed to the side, and Carrie was brought in, and she was given this great introduction on social media and all this kind of stuff, and Carrie became the ring announcer. And I was a little bummed at that, but I do remember kind of being like, okay, let's go ahead and let's just keep doing commentary because that's what we're used to. We don't have to worry about doing anything new. We don't have to worry about the stress.
Right.
And so let's just keep on going. And so we went on, and I kept doing commentary. Well, around August or September, she announces that she's pregnant.
Okay.
And of course, knowing that you kind of have to be able to be a little bit flexible to bend over and get in the ring and stuff,
Right.
I kind of figured, okay, at some point she's going to need time off. Maybe I can prove myself. Now, a few months before this, I'd gotten an opportunity to ring announce for this wrestling show in Kincaid, which is about a half hour south of Springfield. And so this is my first time going outside of Springfield to actually work for other wrestling companies. And so I go to this show, and I'm filling in for the ring announcer who couldn't make this one show. And I told myself before the show, I was like, okay, we're not going to be as bad as we were in Beardstown. We're going to be entertaining. We are going to be charismatic. We're going to be enthusiastic. And that's exactly what I did. And I did 10 times better on that show than I ever could have wished to do in Beardstown. And so I was proud of my performance there. And I was feeling really good about myself because of how much all the people that were on that show told me, how impressed they were. And so I was like, okay, maybe I can do this. And so once Carrie announces she's pregnant, so we have a show in October that we do every year called Brawloween. And Brawloween's going to be her last show there uh, before she goes to take time off to have her kid. And so I go ahead, and after that show, I go up to Archie, and I'm like, hey, Archie, so you're going to need a ring announcer, right? He's like, we already have someone. And here I am thinking, oh, well, maybe he's just going to surprise me, whatever. Because I can't possibly think of anyone that he might have. And so we go on, and he keeps telling me day after day, week after week, we have someone. We get to the show day, and it's about 2 hours before showtime. He said, you might as well go get your commentary stuff because we already have someone. And about a half hour later, I'm standing backstage and I hear Archie talking to one of the other owners, the sound guy, Jason. And I hear Archie and Jason discussing how, oh, well, he canceled. He's not going to be here. And so Archie came up to me. He was like, would you like to ring announce tonight? And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm gonna ring announce for PWA. Awesome. And he actually did have someone else in line. It was Mickey Thomas, who co-founded PWA with Archie in 2011. And Mickey Thomas was going to make his return as the ring announcer, and it was just going to be temporary until Carrie was able to come back from her pregnancy.
Okay.
And so I ring announced this one show. They're like, okay, you're doing this one show because Mickey couldn't be here. And I ring announced the one show, and I felt like I did good. And so then we move on to the next show. And the next show is the same story. Well, Mickey's doing it. And then Mickey cancels about an hour and a half before the show. And so I ring announce again. And after this second show, I went out and bought myself a suit. I bought myself a whole suit, and I was looking great. And I'm like, man, I'm going to look the part now. And so I go out, and I go to that show. I put my suit on, and this is a show we're bringing in Savannah Stone from St. Louis
Right.
for the first time for PWA. And I don't know if have you heard of Stepstool Sarah?
I'm from the St. Louis area, so I
Oh,
know
okay,
Sarah
okay.
through Glory Pro and St. Louis Anarchy, and yeah, she's
Oh,
great.
awesome. Well, if we have time for the road stories, you'll get to hear one about Glory Pro for sure.
Okay, awesome.
So, uh, Sarah, Stepstool Sarah, came up with Savannah Stone, and at this show, um, Brian Ely was talking to Sarah, and Sarah told Brian, well, I'm a ring announcer out of the St. Louis area as well. And Brian gets this bright idea because Brian loves to screw with me. Brian gets this bright idea. Hey, I'm going to go tell Rob that you're ring announcing tonight, and I want to see him freak out. So Brian walks away, and he goes to handle other business. And Jake Lander's standing there. I'm sure you've heard of him
Oh
too.
yeah.
Yes. Jake Lander pulls me aside. He's like, hey, so just so you know, because I know that you do the same thing for me, I'm going to let you know that Brian's going to try to prank you and tell you that Sarah's ring announcing. She's not actually ring announcing, and it's actually going to be you. And I'm like, okay, well, thank you for telling me that. And Sarah looks at me. She's like, I'm sorry. I'm like, it's not your fault. Brian's just Brian. He loves to mess around. And I love him for that. We love to mess around with each other all the time. And so we move on, and Brian comes up to me and says, hey, well, Sarah's going to be ring announcing tonight. And I just gave him oh, okay. And he was like, yeah, so you're on commentary. I was like, okay. And he walked away. And about 15 minutes later, he comes up. He's like, so I thought you were going to start freaking out or anything, but I guess not. So Sarah's not actually ring announcing, and it's going to be you if Mickey doesn't show up. And so I'm like, yeah, man, awesome. And so I'm ready for the show. And Mickey shows up that night, and I'm like, man, I was so excited to ring announce, and now I can't. And I'm like, this is what happens when I get my hopes up. And I went up to Archie. I was like, hey, do you think you could talk to Mickey and maybe see, is it possible for me to co-ring announce with Mickey? And Archie talked to him, and we actually ended up co-ring announcing that show.
That's awesome.
And after that, the next month, Mickey showed up to the show again, and Mickey looked at me. He was like, hey, I'm not ring announcing the show with you. You are too good to have a co-ring announcer. I'm like, Mickey, that's not true. He's like, yes, it is. You're a lot better than you give yourself credit for. So I'm just going to be your co-host. I'll be the host for the show, but you're going to be the ring announcer. I'm like, okay, that's all right, awesome. And so from that point forward, I was the ring announcer for every single show. But for those next couple of months, they were still telling me, I hope you realize this is only temporary until Carrie's ready to come back. Here we are, um, now over 3 years after I started ring announcing. Carrie hasn't come back. And I don't know if she thought that she just wasn't going to be welcomed back. I don't know if she thought she was replaced. That's not the case. I was only a temporary substitute, but she just never ended up coming back. And so, I mean, I just took the ball and I ran with it for as long as I could. And then finally they came up to me one day and they were like, yeah, this is you full time now because it doesn't look like Carrie's going to come back. And so I'm like, wow, okay, awesome. And so I became the full time ring announcer, and that's not to throw shade at Carrie. Carrie was Carrie was good. She was a good host. She had a great attitude. She was great to have in the locker room. It's just that she just never came back. And so that's basically where I started the whole ring announcing journey in itself.
So, how becoming a manager come around, and who gave you that opportunity? How'd you come up with your character? You've had a really really interesting road to get to all these different parts of the wrestling business. So, what what finally
So
brought managing out for you?
I think the starting managing is probably the most interesting road. So in 2017, there were Tim Givens, uh, who I mentioned multiple times already, uh, started a started a fundraising organization having to do with wrestling that was raising money for St. Jude's, called Wrestling for a Cure.
Right.
And he started it. He teamed up with a PWA Hall of Famer, Jason Wilhite, and they both teamed up to start raising money to prevent childhood cancer. And it's a very great cause. And over the past, they've done it 4 years now. Over the past 4 years, they've raised. I'm pretty sure they've raised over $50,000 in total to donate to St. Jude's.
That's awesome. That's
Um,
really really great.
I know. I don't know if it's quite 50,000, but it's well over 30,000 for sure.
Right.
And so, oh geez, so they were gonna have the first year they did it. They had a battle royal, and it's a Dusty Cameron Memorial Battle Royal. Dusty Cameron was a young wrestling fan from, I believe, Litchfield, and he ended up getting cancer at a young age, and he ended up passing away when I believe he was 11 or 12. And so his mom has kind of joined the fight with Wrestling for a Cure to stop childhood cancer. And they started doing this battle royal in memory of Dusty Cameron every single year. And, it always holds a new winner. And each year, what's cool, each year, the previous year's winner enters at number one.
Oh, that is
And they
cool.
do it staggered entry Royal Rumble style. But anyway, so they came up to me, they asked me, they were like, hey, so if we said we were going to get a donation, would you want to be in this battle royal? I was like, I've never trained to wrestle a day in my life. And they kind of convinced me. They were like, listen, a battle royal is nothing but punches and kicks. All you have to do is throw some shots and just don't hit anyone too hard and don't get yourself in trouble, and you'll be protected. I'm
Sure.
like, okay, sure, I'll do it. And so they were like, awesome, cool. And so I threw in my $10 and we were confirmed. Well, they came up to me at the next PWA show and they were like, listen, since we announced that you were in the match, we had a few people kind of upset that you were going to be wrestling when you've not trained. They were like, we're not going to say any names, and I still to this day don't know these names, and I don't really care. They had a point. They
Right.
absolutely had a point. And so I'm like, that's perfectly fine. I completely understand. And this was kind of a weight lifted off my shoulders. I don't have to worry about going out there and trying to be a wrestler.
Right.
And I was like, okay, well, and I thought, PWA just had, at the time, just had three guys graduate their training academy. Um, IJ Sweet, Johnny Kincaid, and a young guy named Dan Liplock. And I was like, at the time, I was like, Dan Liplock, I think, is my favorite. I thought he was the best wrestler out of the three of them at that time. And so I was like, okay, how about leave my $10 in there and Dan Liplock enters the match. And we talked with Dan Liplock, and he was like, hell yeah. I was like, okay, and what if I manage him just because, that kind of still associates me with the match? They're like, that's perfectly fine. So I managed Dan Liplock in that match, and there's a company called Proving Ground Pro that was also in Central Illinois, and we kind of just talked to the promoter, and he decided to let me start managing Dan Liplock over there as well. And so I managed Dan Liplock in Wrestling for a Cure and Proving Ground Pro to start, and then we kind of just started going everywhere else. Zero One USA, United Wrestling Coalition, and PGP were like the three main ones. And so I did that for 2 years up until this year, where Dan Liplock was no more and he became Conley.
Gotcha.
And so that's kind of where the managing thing started. And I started managing Anakin Murphy in IWAU. Um,
That's still based out of Olney.
IWAU is based out of Noble, Illinois.
Okay.
And so I started managing Anakin Murphy in IWAU. And as you saw, I started managing Frank Edwards in Fight Underground.
Okay.
And, well, there'll be some changes with the whole me managing Frank Edwards thing, Fight Underground, coming soon. You'll have to stay tuned for that.
Absolutely. Um.
Um, yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at now with the whole managing thing.
Uh. When you kind of start sinking your teeth more into being a professional wrestling manager, obviously a manager's got at some point to be able to, throw some punches, throw some moves, and then be able to take some moves. Did you start training? At least be able to kind of take a few bumps when the time called for it. And if so, what is the how would you say that managing training would differ from those that are actually becoming wrestlers?
Okay, so I never properly went through training in terms of taking bumps. And I kind of feel like uh, I don't feel like a manager should ever have to take, a perfectly beautiful and clean bump like a wrestler does, because a manager isn't a trained wrestler. A manager's not supposed to know exactly how he's supposed to land off of everything and how he's supposed to, throw a punch or throw a move or whatever.
Right.
Uh, I mean, I get the whole training thing just to make sure everything's safe, but uh, that's basically my view on it. But I do know that wrestling training and managing training start off kind of similarly. You know, a manager does need to know how to take a bump, uh, just so if you start to land wrong, you know how to correct it, all that kind of thing. Um, there's no really like, I don't think there's really a huge difference in terms of something you learn in managing training that you don't learn in wrestling training.
Okay.
Um, that's really all I can think of there.
Um. So there's not like there's a do they make you, or have you seen through or wrestler manager training? Excuse me. Them do the bump drills or do like the conditioning, or is it more so just kind of like
The
what sometimes you see like on TV, like we're gonna have this, this celebrity's gonna do a round of bumps for the wrestling schools so you can show how hard it is. Is it more so like that? Uh,
um, okay, so I can see where you're coming from, and it totally would not hurt for managers to do bump drills and to take part in conditioning training and
right.
warm ups and working out outside of the ring, because as a manager, you never know what's going to happen, and I have a story to prove that.
Let's hear it.
So I was going to manage Dan Liplock in a tag team match in Proving Ground Pro on Labor Day, and it was outside. It was like 90, 95 degrees outside. It was very hot.
Right.
Dan Liplock is going to be teaming up on this show with Lil Nate, who's out of Iowa. They're going to be taking on CJ Shine and Baracus.
Ooh, Barakasan. That's another name I know here from the Southern Illinois St. Louis area. But go on.
Oh,
I'm
yes.
sorry for cutting you off.
No, you're good. You're good. So they find out that Lil Nate's not going to be there, and the promoter. So I looked at the promoter. I said, "So what's the plan?" He said, "It's just going to be a handicap match." And I love Baracus with all my heart. He's such a cool guy. Oh, but he really drugged me into the shit that day because he looked at the promoter and he said, "Why don't you throw Rob in the match, man?" And he was dead serious. And I looked at him. I was like, "No, I'm not a trained wrestler. I really shouldn't be doing that. I'm not trained. I don't have like any gear or anything." And Baracus and the promoter and I think even a little bit of Dan Liplock were like, "Man, it's not going to be that bad. We'll protect you." And they basically pulled me into it. And so I actually did wrestle a proper tag team match at one point. I wouldn't say I wrestled. I threw a couple of stomps and a club to the back, and then I got beat up by Baracus.
Right.
And so that's where it kind of comes around to conditioning and knowing how to bump is helpful in managing, because you never know as a manager if you're going to be thrown into a position where you're going to need to know how to bump, and you're going to need to be in the shape to be able to wrestle a match and not blow up, because when you start to blow up, it starts to become unsafe for you and the guys you're working with.
Right. Um, it's funny. You mentioned Barakas, and I mentioned my days as a very very poor commentator for MMWA out of South Broadway. My couple shows I did it. One of my favorite memories of Barakas is he's coming out, he's doing his thing, he's coming out to watch the match, and I'm trying to do the commentary, and I'm like, trying to do the babyface commentator. Sir, what business do you have out here? And he yells at me, and he takes the bottle of water I had, and he throws it on me. And
Oh
I'm like,
no.
I didn't expect that to happen, so okay. And then he guys are like, hey man, I'm like, no, dude, that was cool, that works. So,
I love
but
him. I love him so
much
much.
love to Brockus there, absolutely. Um, so what got you booked at Fight Underground? Because unfortunately, and you'll have to forgive me for this, I wasn't aware of you or quite a few other pieces of talent that in the independent scene from a little bit further up north. Uh, until Dalton Diamond's a friend of mine, Zach Sawyer's a friend of mine, and starting up Fight Underground, like their page. One, because I want to support professional wrestling in the Southern Illinois / St. Louis area, but two, I want to support my friends, and I see a really well produced, well done, well articulated promo from some guy named Robert Leach talking about how there's no future to Anafight Underground. I guess roundabout way to get into the question here. How'd you get involved with Fight Underground, and then also like where do you find inspiration for promos and things like that? You know, what where do you look to kind of go? How do I talk about this? How do I relate this to my situation in Fight Underground compared to maybe a different promotion you were working at?
Okay, so the way I got booked on Fight Underground is now you talked to Anakin Murphy a couple of weeks ago,
Yes.
and Anakin Murphy is Anakin Murphy. I don't know if he talked about this really. I know he said that we're friends in wrestling, but I don't think he mentioned how good of friends we are. Me and Anakin Murphy have been friends since before he even started in the business. Since he was a fan, me and him have been friends.
Gotcha.
Um, we started with going to shows together while I was ring announcing for PWA, but we'd go to shows like in Kincaid together and that kind of thing. And then I'm the one that got him on board with PWA to start being a referee. Um, and since Anakin Murphy really started wrestling, he has been so cool and he's such a good dude. Every time he goes to get a booking, he's always asking the promoter, "Hey, do you have room for a manager, ring announcer, commentator?" Because I've got my guy Rob Leach, who, and Anakin puts me over. He tells the promoter, he's really good, he's reliable. Whatever he says to the promoter, that's none of my business. I think he embellishes a little bit on how good I am, but that's just my opinion. But anyway, he put me over, or he asked me if he wanted it. Oh, good lord, if I can speak, he asked me if I wanted him to put me over to Zach at Fight Underground and see if I could get booked. And originally, it was just okay. We're gonna bring you on as a commentary guy. And then it was okay. Well, we've also got this guy that we like to pair you with as a manager. I'm like, okay, that'll be really cool, awesome. And so I went to that first show, and I managed Frank. And of course, before that, I did the No Futures promo.
Right.
And
Where you don't have to give too much detail, like if it gives away personal information about your location or anything, but it looked like you'd driven your car on top of the roof of a building. Where was this scenery at for this promo?
okay, so here in Springfield, there downtown, there's a huge parking garage where a bunch of, I guess many people would say hoodlums, like to go into and do whatever, drink alcohol, smoke weed. I don't do any of that stuff, but there's a bunch of people in Springfield who like to go up there, just get together, have a party, hang out, drink, smoke, whatever they're going to do, and they bring a bunch of spray paint, and especially on the very top of this parking garage, there's so much spray paint everywhere. And I just remember thinking, okay, Fight Underground is the return of hardcore wrestling to Southern Illinois. So I kind of put together what's a really hardcore place that looks hardcore and really grungy and gritty and just absolutely on edge that I can go and do this promo. And so I went and I just drove up to the parking garage with my friend and I was like, listen, I have to come up with ideas for this promo. And so I just got out of the car and I just walked around and I looked and I saw that sign that said no futures. And I was like, that's what I'm basing it off of. And I took like 5 minutes to think of what I wanted the premise of the promo to be. And then I just said, hey, record this. And that's where we started.
It was awesome, and it intrigued me to who you were, and I was actually looking forward. Other than New Jack and Dalton and all the other stuff, I was like kind of looking forward to see what kind of things you do to get underneath the skin of the Southern Illinois fan base while
Oh, yeah.
we were at the show.
The funny part about when that the funny part about when that promo got uploaded to Anna Fight Underground's Facebook page was, of course, this is on a show with New Jack, and of course, I'm not a small guy. I've got some weight on me, of course.
Right.
So this video goes out of me doing this promo, and literally the first like 4 comments on there. Why would you book New Jack and Mass Transit on the same show? And I'm like,
Oh
listen
no.
up. I'm going to have fun with this crowd because I'm going to bury them if they say anything about Mass Transit.
Um, I've had a few people on the show that, or on my podcast that were on that show, talk about New Jack, Anakin, Bull Bronson. Did you have any interaction with the original gangster?
I didn't have any interaction with New Jack. Um, I could tell that he was just kind of doing his own thing.
Right.
And, I just thought of what it'd be like to be in his spot. I just got off a I just got off a plane. I just went and had lunch. Now I got to go do this show. And I kind of started thinking, maybe he got up real early, maybe he's in a bad mood, whatever. I just kind of put myself in his shoes. I was like, and I just thought, I wouldn't want 4,800 people coming up to me at this wrestling show being like, oh my God, you're New Jack, you're New Jack. And so I just kind of tried to keep my distance from him.
Gotcha.
Now, of course, I think we had a couple of passing words, hey, it's good to see you, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Um, but one vivid memory was in the locker room. New Jack was just sitting alone in a chair, and Anakin might have brought this up. He
I,
was wearing a surgical boot because
right.
he had had a leg injury, and so I'm standing there changing after the show's over, and New Jack is just staring at the wall, and Anakin Murphy looks at him and says, "Hey man, what'd you do to your leg?" And New Jack kind of repositions himself and turns toward Anakin, and he says, "I got a fuse in my leg." And like, I don't think any of us knew what that meant. And so Anakin was just like, "Oh, okay," and turned away. And out of the corner of my eye, New Jack sat there for like a solid 30 to 45 seconds staring at Anakin Murphy. And I was like, I don't know if he's not pleased or if he's just like tired and zoned out. But like, it was awkward to say the least. I don't
Right.
want to sound like just because I watched, the Dark Side of the Ring documentary, like I don't want to be like, well, I thought New Jack was going to kill him.
Right.
But, it was just kind of weird because I'm like, this is Anakin Murphy, my one of my closest friends for all these years, and New Jack is staring a hole through him. I was
Anakin
like,
Anakin brought that up on when he was on the show, but it's really cool hearing your perspective just as like the outsider
oh
with all
yeah,
that. Maybe one day I can have New Jack on the show and go, "What'd you think of Rob Leach?"
oh good lord, I'll probably be like, who? Who's that?
um, we're we're running out of time, but I really appreciate you being on the uh, being on the podcast. I just kind of saw you randomly on Facebook. I'm like, oh hey, I remember telling Anakin Murphy I really wanted to interview him. Maybe I should just reach out. So I
Hey
appreciate you
man,
being
I'm
so.
glad you did.
I appreciate you being so welcoming. But before we go, I do have a few more things I want to ask you. One, you said you had a Glory Pro story, and I got to hear that because that's one of my. I want to say it's my hometown promotion. 'Cause like I got Stride, Glory Pro, St. Louis Anarchy, Fight Underground. All those are really close to me, and I really follow them. So you got to tell me about Glory Pro.
Okay, so it was about this time last year. It was, in fact, if I'm going to be honest, it was a year ago today,
Okay.
which I just now realized, which is awesome. Uh, it was me and Conley and Jacques Kennedy, who are two guys Anakin Murphy mentioned to you.
Hmm.
Uh, Jacques and Connolly are just very close friends of ours as well. And the three of us were driving to Sauget for Glory Pro's Unsanctioned.
Which,
And
yeah, I was at that
Unsanctioned 2.
show. I was at
You
that
were?
show. Yes, this was
Oh,
the one. Effie was on this one.
yes, Effie
Yeah,
was.
yeah, okay. Yes, I've been to. I couldn't remember because they had a Glory Pro unsanctioned. One had Effie, and then there was another one. I guess that was in 2018 where it was they had X Pac and Buff Bagwell and
Yeah, yeah,
Scott
yeah, yeah,
Norton.
yeah.
But go on. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
so uh, we were on the way to Sauget, and like I've just been following my GPS. We're listening to music, and I'm in the middle lane of a three-lane interstate, and we're 5 minutes away from the venue, and my GPS says take this exit now. I look over, and I'm driving by the exit, and so in a panic, I go to switch lanes, and I turn my signal on, and I look in the rear view mirror, and I don't see anything. So my dumbass just doesn't check my blind spot. I go to change lanes and I just sideswipe some lady.
Oh.
And so we get in a car accident and we went from being, all right, we're going to get there probably 5 minutes early to we got there an hour late. We got there by the time everything was already set up. And so basically, this lady was unhappy, as you would be if someone just kind of hit you in your driver's side door and you're like, ah. So I got out of the car to kind of try and talk to her. This lady's not getting out of her car. She's just on the phone with the police and her boyfriend or whoever she was talking to. And I'm standing on the side of this interstate, and like we're on a bridge. Now, I don't know exactly if anyone knew this or not. It may sound stupid to bring up, but the bridges that are made for the interstate, um, they're made to have a bounce to them. So that way, if an earthquake goes through, the interstate won't just buckle and collapse. So it's very scary standing on the side of this interstate bridge and like large semis are going by at like 65 miles an hour and you're just bouncing up and down on this bridge the whole time on your feet. And I'm like, oh my God, this is scary. And I have anxiety driving on the busy St. Louis interstate anyway, especially around semis, because before I was born, I had an uncle who was a state cop, and he was killed in a car accident on the interstate because his cop car was hit by a semi. Um, but so basically, a guy from the Department of Transportation says, all right, you guys can just go ahead and follow my truck, and we're going to go downtown and there's a cop waiting for us downtown. So we go over, and we're like right by the arch. We can see the entrance of the arch from where we are. And this cop comes up. He's like, "Hey, man, so what happened?" And I tell him exactly what happened. I'm not going to hold anything back. And he's like, "Listen, man," because he could tell that I felt. I told him, I was like, "I feel terrible about this. I don't know why I wasn't paying attention." He's like, "Listen, man, don't worry about it. This stuff happens literally all the time." And I'm like, "All right." And so we get taken care of, and uh, I end up going to Sauget. We all ended up going to the show, and we got there late. And I'd had Connolly get a hold of KLD, who I know you had on the show
Right.
a couple of weeks ago, or a few weeks ago.
Right.
And KLD is like, "Listen, man, just take your time as long as everyone's okay. I'm not that worried about it." And so we went to Unsanctioned that day, and Kevin came up to me after we had been there for a few minutes, and he was like, "Listen, do you want to ring announce the pre-show?" And I was like, "Do I want to ring announce the pre-show for Glory Pro Wrestling? Hell yeah!" And so I don't know if you were there by the time the pre-show was happening.
I wasn't because we're just gonna sidetrack in stories, but let's screw it. This is the fun part about this show. I remember for the NWO show, we got lost. Like me and my buddy
Oh,
that went. So like, because it's always like go here, and it's like you take all these weird roundabout ways to get to Pops. So we like kind of got lost and kind of got put in the wrong. Not trying to judge anything, but kind of got put in one of the more wrong parts of the Metro East. So I
uh-huh.
said, you know what? I'm not going to take the interstate this time and get lost. I'm gonna go through Belleville and all this, and I found this like alternate way where I didn't have to get on the interstate and make all those different turns, and I'm like, I'm good. But the day that this show was happening in Belleville, that's where the Catholic Church diocese is for the area, and there's this they have what's called like Our Lady of the Snow Shrine, and they were having this big Christmas thing kind of going on. So traffic was backed up like no other because everybody was trying to get in and look at this Christmas light presentation going on at the
Oh,
Belleville Shrine. So I'm just like here, huh? Uh, so unfortunately, I missed the pre-show and missed your ring announcing because I thought I was being smart by avoiding the interstate, but instead I think I got in like right as the pre-show's kind of like ending. I got in.
okay.
I got in because I remember like seeing Welcome to Glory Pro, and I remember like kind of Sarah was doing something, and they were all doing their thing, and I'm like, okay, did I miss anything? And people were already kind of in their seats, and I'm like, well, I didn't miss the main show, so I guess I'm okay, you know.
Yeah, all that was Valentina Loca and Sophie King in a singles match, and then an eight-man scramble match. I can't even remember all the people in it.
What are?
But no, that was a fun night.
Oh yeah, Glory Pro says never let me down, and I hope we can. I hope it can resume soon.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
me too.
what are your goals for the future?
My goals for the future. Okay. Um, for 2021, I just want to have as much fun doing as many shows as I can. I don't really care about this year. I'm not really focused on expanding my name and making it big, more so than I'm focused on just having fun doing what I'm doing and getting better at it.
Okay,
So that way, when I can start to go and make my name a little more known, that way I'm even better at it than I am now.
awesome.
I think I think that's my immediate goal for the next year at least.
That's a sounds like an awesome goal, and I really hope that your name gets out there more because I really think you got a great promo style, and I really now that you know managers have always kind of been around on the independent scene, but now that managers are kind of more of an in thing in the mainstream, maybe the managers on the independents will now have something to strive for more, and I really hope that more people just outside of the state of Illinois know who Rob Leach and Anakin Murphy and all y'all are. So
Oh yeah, man. Like, and it means so much to hear you say that because being being who I am personally, I truly don't believe that I'm as good as some others think I am. And so, like, it really means a lot to hear that because it kind of just reassures me that, okay, I must be doing something right.
um, you are doing something right, sir. And do you have any social media you'd like to plug so someone who maybe hasn't seen or heard about you can give you a follow and see what I've been seeing?
All right. Well, if you want to check me out on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, the Robert Leach, just at the Robert Leach is all you need to type in. And that's how you'll find me on Instagram and Twitter. And if you go to facebook.com/slash the Robert Leach, you should be able to find me there as well. And yeah, it's great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for being on the show. And if you'd enjoyed this, please give it a like, share, subscribe for more content, not just from the world of pro wrestling, but from the world of gaming, anime, comic books, and all things geek culture. Follow me on my social media pages, facebook.com/slash athleticgeek89, Twitter at athletic_geek89, Instagram at athleticgeek89. And if you'd like to help improve the channel financially, hit me up on Patreon, patreon.com/slash athleticgeek89. Give Rob a follow, and we'll see you next time.